This was ugly smelling, ugly looking, and incredibly tall.
Thousands of seabirds dead and dying along 500 kilometers of the American west coast. Offshore species showing up on land in scenes reminiscent of a man-made disaster.
The scope of the situation is hard for even the scientists to grasp. The Wildlife Center of the North Coast near Astoria is flat out overwhelmed.
Even though I've been picking them up, I go back to the same place, there's more birds coming in.
The birds in the foam were offshore species, mewers, grebes and loons, only seen on the beach when they're really in trouble. So volunteers started getting themselves organized to head out and rescue them.
Typically, when I come out here and walk on the beach, I could walk for a mile or two and see one or two dead birds. But on this day, obviously, there were literally hundreds that you could see.
They were wet, sandy. It was really a mess. I've never seen anything like that.
Wildlife centers cleared the decks, but they simply couldn't keep up with the deluge.
Every little available space that we could find, we had walled off to make an enclosure. We had kennels up on the counters. I mean, just about any available space we could find.
As the rescue efforts struggled to keep up, even the scientists were overwhelmed by this event. Julia Parrish is an ornithologist at the University of Washington.
I've been a seabird biologist for about 25 years, and I've seen a lot of deaths. This event was huge. I've never seen anything like it. I hope never to see anything like it again.
So what was causing such an enormous and devastating event? Well, as the scientists looked to figure it out, they came across something in the archives that might help them. 2 years earlier, and 1,300 kilometers down the coast at Monterey Bay in California, seabirds had died in their thousands. Rafe Cadella at the University of Santa Cruz is an ocean ecologist, and he was involved in unraveling the 2007 mystery.
And initially, when the birds started coming in, it was assumed that it was from an oil spill. But as soon as they tested them, they realized that there was no petroleum products on the birds. And so at that point, it gets classified as something called a mystery spill.
At the time, there was a natural event happening out at sea that's known as a red tide, a mass of algae that group together in huge numbers. Some of these can be very toxic, but this particular dinoflagellate algae had never been recorded causing any harm before.
We're trying to figure out, well, what's the connection between this dinoflagellate that's supposed to be harmless and what's going on with these birds. We had this red tide offshore, but on the beach there was this foam piling up. We assumed the foam had something to do with the algae, but we didn't know exactly what was going on.
The birds in the foam looked bedraggled. And these are species that spend much of their time diving underwater, almost swimming to catch their prey. To stay warm, they rely on their terribly efficient down layer, which is not only insulating, but vitally waterproof, keeping the cold water away from their skin. Yet the birds on the beach were freezing. So Rafe and his colleagues began experimenting to see what was happening to their feathers.
If you dip feathers into normal water, I just dip that in and nothing happens. The feather is still nice and fluffy. The problem is that when we dip it into the foam, instead of popping back out, it's just all clotted down. And so the top of the feather is completely covered in this sort of nasty goo. Eventually all that down is going to be collapsed all the way against the quill of the feather, and it's no longer waterproof at all.
It's as if you went swimming in the cold ocean in a wetsuit, and all of a sudden your wetsuit dissolved. You wouldn't last very long. And that's exactly what happened to the birds. The result was the largest known mortality of marine birds anywhere in the world ever due to an algal bloom.
8,000 bodies washed up in this event, and it's thought that many thousands more died out at sea. But for the rescued birds, there was hope, as the scientists found found a relatively simple fix.
One of the things that came out of our study is they very quickly realized that if you get to the birds before they actually die, all you need to do is put them in clean water and keep them warm. And they can clean themselves. It's just a matter of getting rid of this foam and keeping them from going into hypothermia.
At the rescue centres, this was encouraging news. But the birds were in such poor condition, it was a fight against the clock.
To get the birds back to their being waterproof again and getting the toxic algae off of them, we would swim them. And so we would get as many as we could in here at one time. And they'd be in here just a very short period. The water, of course, would turn yellow-green. It was pretty horrible to see. It took more than one washing to get that algae off of them. And by about 3 days of washing, 3 or 4, we started noticing a difference.
For the lucky ones, intensive care from the volunteers restored them to health, and with their waterproofing back, many were capable of returning home. It's all down to chemical reactions. When these take place inside the